and welcome to tonight's Bible study. We're in Proverbs 9, and I remember this Proverbs only too well. And the reason I remember it so well, we will see the famous verse, which is verse 10: the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Let's go ahead and read the proverb, and then we'll discuss it, and then I'll focus on a couple areas. Uh, Proverbs 9 read, Wisdom has built her house. She has set up its 7 pillars. She has prepared her meat and mixed her wine. She has also set her table. She has sent out her servants, and she calls from the highest point of the city. Let all who is simple come to my house. To those who have no sense, she says, Come, eat my food, and drink the wine I have mixed. Leave your simple ways, and you will live. Walk in the way of insight. Whosoever corrects a mocker invites insult. Whoever rebukes the wicked incurs abuse. Do not rebuke mockers, or they will hate you. Rebuke the wise, and they will love you. Instruct the wise, and they will be wiser. Teach the righteous, and they will add to their learning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. For through wisdom your days will be many, and years will be added to your life. If you are wise, your wisdom will reward you. If you are a mocker, you alone will suffer. Folly is an unruly woman. She is simple and knows nothing. She sits at the door of her house, on a seat at the high point of the city, crying and calling to those who pass by, who go straight on their way. Let all who are simple come to my house. To those who have no sense, she says, stolen water is sweet. Food eaten in secret is delicious. But little do they know that death are there, that her guests are deep in the realms of the dead. Again, there's several parts to this that I want to focus on. The first one that I want to focus on is the first part, which says, Wisdom has built her house. She has set it up, its 7 pillars. And there are many interpretations of what is this, the 7 pillars of wisdom. And I remember reading this and then trying to figure out what are the 7 pillars of wisdom. That's something I want to learn so that I too can be wise. And over and over again, as we've been studying about wisdom, we see that wisdom is starts with knowledge that you need to know. On the other hand, the contrast in this, in picking up in verse 13, is folly is an unruly woman. She is simple and knows nothing. And so Solomon is making a big distinction between people that are wise and people who are simple. And he points out that the beginning of wisdom is to fear God. And I want to relate this to being a Christian, that the beginning of wisdom is to accept God. And we don't want to use the word fear God as in to be afraid, but to reverence God, to respect God, to give him his due respect. After all, he is God. He is the creator, and he does indeed demand or respect or reverence. And unfortunately, there are many people who do not have that kind of respect for God. As a matter of fact, they come to the conclusion there's no God, or if there is a God, so what? He's not going to do anything to me. And as Christians, we realize that the wages of sin is death, and the gift of God is eternal life. We respect God. We acknowledge God for who he is and accept him as God. And we accept him as God and the great gift he has given us through his son, Jesus Christ. As I mentioned, I remember as a teenager reading this, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, and realize that true wisdom comes from God. As a matter of fact, we see in James chapter 1, verse 5, it says, is James chapter 1 in the New Testament says, if any of you lack wisdom, ask of God. Because ultimately, God is the author, the creator of wisdom and knowledge. And we can go to him and ask. And again, after I put those two verses together, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And at first I thought fear, to be afraid, but then I read it's to respect God is the beginning of wisdom. And if you really want wisdom, God is such a good loving God, you can go and ask him for it. And so I started praying, God, I want to be wiser. I want to be better. I remember also reading this psalm, and it said that wisdom has set up her 7 pillars. And a lot of people have made a lot about this. What is this 7 pillars um, uh, that leads to wisdom? And depending on who you read and what you read, if you read from the scripture here, it's right here in that, that she has set this 7 pillars up. She has prepared her meat and mixed her wine and on, and use those as metaphors. Um, I also have been talking about the fact that um, in order for you to go from being simple to being wise, or for you to go from ignorance to knowledge, you have to learn. It takes studying. And and so I went along that line and thought about classic studying. Um, and obviously, depending on your age, most of y'all would remember the 3 R's, even though they don't start with R, they just emphasize the letter R. Reading, reading is the first R, and unfortunately, a lot of people never read after they get out of school. And the worst thing is, uh, a lot of people read at a very low level. School in America teach you to read up to about the 6th, 7th grade. And once you reach that level, that's as high a level as most people go. Um, you can read almost everything that is printed, but anything that has anything to do beyond that, it's very difficult. And I remember Mr. Buchanan telling me, Cowboy, they call it the 3 R's for a reason. And the first one is reading. And you need to read, and you just don't need to read the elementary stuff. And it's written up to the 7th grade. And if that's all you want, that's fine. But I encourage you to go to college. I encourage you to push your level of reading and understanding. And reading is so important. And as I mentioned to many of y'all, that people don't read beyond school, and the only time they read is when they have to read. But one of my daily practices is to read every day. I put aside at least a couple hours just to read, and to read in many different fields. And I mentioned this before, but I'm going to repeat it here. To not read is just as bad as not being able to read. And so not only do I read my Bible, but I read other books to gather information and to gather knowledge. So for me, the 3 R's are very important. The first one is reading. The second one is writing. Writing. Today, a lot of people don't do writing by hand. They may write by computers, but the reality is a lot of people don't write. But basic education is reading and writing. You can read what somebody write, and you can write something for yourself. And again, most people don't know how to write. And if they do write, it is very simple ideas, simple things. And so we have to learn how to read and write. That's basic for education. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't read, much less write, and they can speak, but that's about it. They don't read and write. And I found that very true, especially in the prison environment, that part of the biggest problem why we had a lot of inmates is they could not read and write. As I mentioned a couple weeks ago, one of the things I tried to do was to teach them how to read and how to write. Uh, Especially in prison, they had to learn how to write letters to their families because they had limited phone limit time and how many minutes they had. And so they had to learn to write letters. We don't do that today. So one of the three R's was reading, writing. I know writing starts with a W, but it sounds like it starts with an R. English spelling. And the last one was arithmetic or math. You had to learn words for reading and writing and numbers, basic things that, and again, there are many people who don't have these basic skills. Or you could look at it from the classic educational thing that started with Greece, such as grammar and rhetoric and philosophy and morals, and the Romans added to it gymnastics, and they also added to it this idea of doing mathematics through geometry and such. Depending upon the different school of thought, they come up with 7 different things that you could learn as the basic pillars, the basic necessity for education. And I remember reading about that, and my wife homeschooled, and, you know, part of the homeschooling was a classic education of logic, to think logically, to think out like the Greeks and the Romans did. Today, a lot of people don't have logic. They just do things just because. They don't have morals, which, a firm foundation for life. They don't have grammar, which is basically English, or in modern language, it's reading and writing. They don't have the grammar to put together a constructive sentence that makes sense with a subject, and on and on. Much less rhetoric, which is public speaking. A big fear of people is to stand in front of others and to put together a coherent message. I know I'm a pastor and that's kind of easy for me, but that's the number one fear for many people, is to be able to stand before somebody else and to say what you're thinking. And so those were what the Greeks and the Romans thought as to be an educated person, to have knowledge, to gain knowledge, the grammar, the rhetoric, the philosophy, which was just love of knowledge, morals, to just love knowledge and to pursue it, is not enough, but to pursue it from a moral standpoint. And for us as Christian, the moral standpoint is a Christian-based standpoint, where we do what we do with the mind of Christ, which is to love and to accept and to forgive. And one of the things y'all constantly hear from me, I never preach doom and gloom. I always preach that God is a God of love, a God of forgiveness, a God of acceptance, a God that is inclusive, that includes everybody, regardless of race, color, creed, sex, gender, etc. He's a God of freedom and equality. And so that moral background is important for us to see that wisdom is part of that. The important thing that I also see is that in Solomon, he put wisdom standing on this high point and calling out to people, come to my house, come and learn. But picking up in verse 13, folly, the opposite of wisdom, or ignorance, is also sitting at the high point and is easy accessible. And here's the thing, it's easy to get educated. It's easy also to not get educated. Unfortunately, a lot of people do the easy things rather than the hard things. It's simple in America to get educated. As a matter of fact, the kids have to go to school for 12 years. 12 years. And I know during the coronavirus, I've heard from some parents that, school possibly this fall will be just Monday, Tuesday for some, and Tuesday, Wednesday for some others, and they won't have full school and all this. But here's the thing, it's not the amount of hours they spend in school, but the quality of education that they receive. Are they receiving the basic reading, writing, arithmetic? Are they receiving that moral background? Are they able to do any kind of public speaking, to learn grammar, etc.? Unfortunately, we will find out, as Solomon writes, because of the lack of vision, my people perish. Because of the lack of understanding, because of the lack of wisdom, people perish. And what it is, in my words, because people are ignorant, they are simple and ignorant, they lose. And here's the thing, there's a vast difference between being ignorant and being stupid. And let me explain what I mean. Ignorance is simply not knowing. I am ignorant about a lot of things. I'm ignorant about air conditioning. If my air conditioning break, I have no idea. If plumbing, if my plumbing break, I can shut off the water, but I have no idea. I'm ignorant about electricity. I can go on for hours about so many things that I'm ignorant about. But reading and writing and basic arithmetic, none of us should be ignorant. And more important, none of us should be ignorant about the things of the world, especially about the Bible. And so I took James 1:5 literally, and I asked God for wisdom. Unfortunately, ignorance is different than stupidity. Ignorance is not knowing. And we are all ignorant to a lot of things. And, the way we can gain knowledge is by studying what we're interested in. Obviously, as a minister, I'm very interested in the Bible, but I'm also interested in philosophy. I'm interested in business. I'm interested in leadership. I'm interested in science. I'm interested in so many different areas. And those are the areas that I study. There are other areas, as I mentioned, I'm not interested in. I'm not interested in fixing my car. I'm not interested in fixing the plumbing. There are other people, that's what they do. I pay those people for what they do. The difference between ignorance and stupidity, from my worldview, ignorance is not knowing. Stupidity is to know and still do the opposite. So a person is stupid. They know what to do, but they don't do it. We go on and see that Solomon points out, picking up in verse 7, it says, "Whosoever corrects a mocker invites insult, and whosoever rebuke the wicked incur abuse." And I can tell you, there are some people who, no matter what you do or say to them, they just are that way. In prison, I remember one of my goals was to try to help everybody. I wanted to convert everybody to the Christian worldview, and I still want to do that in some ways. I'm still preaching and teaching and trying to convince people that Christ is the best way. But what I've learned is that not everybody is going to say yes to the message. Not everybody is going to say, "You know what, Ricardo, that is true." As a matter of fact, I realize this because on the day of Pentecost, Peter stood up and he preached the best message in the world concerning Jesus Christ. And the scripture said about 3,000 people were added to the church that day. But you know what? It did not point out the 3,000 was just a small percentage of the people who were present that day. As a matter of fact, most of the people that were there that day thought they were drunk, did not believe, they insulted them, and they walked away from the message. And I finally realized, you know what? There are some people who are going to reject the message. There are some people who are going to mock it. There are some people who are wicked and they're going to try to destroy it. I don't, my job, your job as a Christian is to get the message out there. And if a person accepts it, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. If they accept it, good for them. If they reject it, whosoever corrects a mocker invites insult. I don't go around correcting them. My job is, as I mentioned in the parable of the sower a few weeks ago, there are some seeds that going to fall on that Sunday message. Some seeds going to fall on the wayside. Some are going to fall in shallow ground. Some are going to fall and the thorns will choke it. I don't go around trying to correct people. They have the right, the freedom to choose not to believe in God and to choose to live their life. I used to want to go around and fix people. That's not my job anymore. My job is to sow the seed, to throw it out there, and if somebody mocks it, That's their view. Somebody is wicked and rebuke it. That's their view. So listen to what the verse says. Do not rebuke mockers, or they will hate you. And I can tell you, I spent a few years in the prison system trying to shame people into accepting the truth and to try to help them. But here's the thing. Some people don't want help. And until they are ready for help, there's nothing you can do. All we can do is keep planting the seed, and if they're mockers and such, so be it. We see that picking up in verse 13, as I said, the opposite is also true. Folly is there. She's at the door. She's inviting simple people, and it leads to death. I want to talk about, going back to the top part, about the 7 pillars of wisdom. And I came across something that was very interesting to me about 7 levels of awareness. 7 levels of awareness to go from ignorance to wisdom, to go from ignorance to knowing. And I want to start at the bottom level. The bottom level is where we all start. As I mentioned, we all start ignorant when we are babies. We don't know how to read, we don't know how to write, we don't know how to do our arithmetic, we don't know anything. And that level is the animalistic level. Think about babies. When they are born, they basically are animalistic, and it's a fight-flight reaction. And do you know some people, even though they're adults, they can speak the language, they can read, they can write, but they live their lives in fear. And they're like an animal. They either fight or they flight. And some people live their lives at that level of ignorance. The second level is mass. And by that I mean they follow the masses. They do what everybody else is doing. They go along with the crowd. And I unfortunately, we see a lot of that today. The riots, that's what politicians do, is try to get the mass to go. One of my philosophy, if I ever see a crowd of people running and 1 or 2 or 3 people going a different way, I'm not going to follow the mass. Let's be realistic. The majority of people are wrong. The majority is often wrong. These people don't think for themselves. They just follow others. This third level is what I call aspiration, or what they call aspiration, and that is the desire to do something. And that desire is to be more, to do more, to have more. And I remember that was where I was as a teenager. I went through the level as a little kid, as an animalistic fight, react. I went through following other people, mass reaction. And then finally, as a teenager, I had these aspirations. I wanted to be more, do more. I had this desire. And as I mentioned, as a teenager, I ran across my mentor, Mr. Buchanan, and he encouraged me to go to college. But it was just a desire. I had to become what I call the 4th level, which is an individual. And rather than following the crowd, I started expressing my own uniqueness. And that meant it was a very difficult thing. I remember as a teenager, having to say no to my family, no to my friends, and to I remember from age 13, 14, 15, and 16, I was in a class of youth of 1. When I first arrived there were about 15 kids. And the reason there were 15 kids was we had a young, dynamic pastor, and the kids and we went out skiing, we went bowling, we had pizza parties, and there were about 15 kids. He graduated from college and went to seminary, and the very next week we went from 15 kids to 1, and my teacher became this mentor that I mentioned. But here's the thing. Meeting that mentor was the best thing for me, because before, as I mentioned, I was following the group. I wanted to be a part of the group, and we talked about this, influence and such. But I aspired for more, and I became more individualistic. And what Mr. Buchanan taught me was, cowboy, in order for you to aspire to go to college and to seminary and to be an individual and express your own uniqueness, you need the ability, which is the fifth level of discipline. Discipline. And this is the ability to give yourself a command and to follow it. This is a very difficult level. And I remember wanting to become a minister, and he said, you have to go to college and then you have to go to seminary. It took me 7 years. But here's the thing, I had the desire, I wanted it, and I disciplined myself to do it. A lot of people give up too early in life. They don't have the discipline. And what I learned from discipline and is if you practice one discipline in your life, you can practice discipline in any area of your life. Discipline is one of those things that a lot of people fear. And that's a level of awareness, is to be able to discipline yourself. And here's what the thing is. I had the desire and I made a decision that I was going to do it. And I disciplined myself to follow that decision no matter what. It took 7 years, but the decision was made as a teenager, and 7 years later it manifested itself. Once I got the education, I had to move to the next level of awareness, which is experience. Because here's the thing, to get to wisdom, it's more than book knowledge. And that's what school teach you. High school teach you the basic 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic, or, depending upon the subject today, we're so sophisticated as a society. But beyond that, you need the discipline to go on if you desire to do that. But once you get the degree, that's not the end. You need experience. Experience. And you gain experience by learning. Unfortunately, a lot of people never get experience. They keep repeating the same thing over and over and over again. They don't analyze their life and look at their life and say, you know what, I've been doing this same stupid thing over and over again, and I haven't learned anything from it. Y'all know people like that? I know a lot of people like that. They are older, and they have been doing the same thing. I remember when I met Miss Buchanan, and she was in her 90s at the time, and she was sharp as a whip. And we were talking one day, and I said, Miss Buchanan, you're older, and you have a sharp memory, and you're still good. God really blessed you. And she said, why are you asking this question? I said, I know a lot of old people, and their memory is slipping, and they blame their age for it. And you're older than them, and you're still sharp. And she said, Ricardo, when those people were young, they gave an excuse that's why they had a bad memory and they couldn't do things. And now that they're old, they're still having an excuse. The truth is, they don't read, they don't study. And one of the things I learned from Miss Buchanan when she was in her 90s was that she read every day. She studied. As a matter of fact, the small public library in Navasota, if you ever went there and you opened the book and look, you would see a dot on one of the sides. And what it was that was her way of saying, I read that book. And you could go to any book in that library, and 95% of the book she had read, because she read and read and read all the way till she was 103. She was reading. She gained experience. And the last level, as I mentioned, there are 7 levels of awareness, is mastery, where whenever anything happened, rather than reacting, rather than fight or flight, you stop, you think, and you respond. We control ourselves and only ourselves. And I think that what is true wisdom is, rather than being a reactive person, is for you to realize, what of these 7 levels am I on? Am I animalistic, fight, flight? Am I following the masses? Am I aspiring for something better? Am I as a unique individual created by God and doing what is right? Am I disciplined to study and learn? Do I have experience? And do I have mastery? And I've been aspiring now, as I mentioned, since I was a teenager, 40 years. 40 years. And there are certain things that we should, as we get older, be masters of, rather than. But the reality is, even age does not count for it. There are a lot of people who are still, their bodies may have aged, but they did not gain wisdom, they did not gain understanding, and they did not gain knowledge. And I could say that, and unfortunately, it is true. The fear of God is the beginning of knowledge. If you lack knowledge and wisdom, ask God. But also, just because you ask God doesn't mean He's just going to give it to you and everything's going to be okay. You have to do your part of it. And I hope that this 7 levels of awareness, and if you're interested in seeing this, I can type out the different 7 levels and send it to y'all or talk to y'all some more about this. But most people never move up the scale of